Welcome back to the Football Fitness Federation podcast. I'm delighted to welcome back onto the podcast again for another appearance, Mr. Jordan Tyra. Jordan, how are we doing?
I'm good, thanks. Yeah, I keep coming back. Someone keeps asking me back on, so I better do
He's like a bad smell around here. He's always
it.
hanging around. And also a massive welcome. I'm just a word of warning. I'm going to butcher his surname, but he's going to tell you how to pronounce it properly. This is Daan Ganzinga. Dan, tell everyone how you say it properly.
You actually did great, man. It's Ganzinga, but I know for non-Dutch speakers, it's really a really terrible name.
I feel like I did okay.
Yeah, you did better than the first time.
No, Dan, thank you very much for coming on, mate. We've just been chatting about obviously the time of year that we're in at the minute in terms of off season, preparing for the new season. So we're going to touch on some aspects around pre-season, planning pre-season, testing and things like that in a little bit. But Dan, just to give everyone a little bit of background on yourself and also your current role, do you want to just give us a little timeline on your career so far?
Yeah, sure. Well, every time I tell the story, I have like a little, like not the typical pathway of the performance or like the performance specialist. I started out actually, of course, as a football player and played in the academy of my hometown club, which is also the club I work at currently, SC Cambuur. And yeah, really tried to make my way to the big stage, of course. And then a little bit traditional story of the failed athlete. I was actually injured in my academy years, and that what piques my interest also a lot in physical training. So that's where it started for me. But normally they would progress in like a sports science degree or yeah, something similar. My mind at the time was more on business and making money. So I started actually doing an international business course here in my hometown already. But besides the course, always interested in helping people, training them physically. So I volunteered eventually at the role of yeah, strength and conditioning coach for the academy at the club, at my hometown club, and really progressed through the years, yeah, in the role I'm currently at. So currently I have like a full-time role, and I work mainly this coming year. I work mainly for the first team, and in the past 4 years, I worked like in a sort of a double role in which I help the academy grow, but also manage the first team together with my colleagues. So besides the international business background, yeah, always interested in helping people, driving performance, and that's what ended up, yeah, bringing me here.
Awesome, mate. Awesome. We were talking before about the club and the sort of position of the club. I know you mentioned the new stadium and things like that. So do you want to give a little bit of background and maybe a little update on the stature of the club at the minute?
Yeah. Yeah, as what you spoke about, it's and I actually told my colleagues that I will do my best to represent the club, of course. But it's such a growing environment, and the culture, yeah, if I compare it maybe to different clubs, is incredible. It's a really young club, ambitious. Currently, we play in the second league of the Netherlands. We relegated 2 seasons ago. So we played at the highest levels, and now we're trying to build it up again to perform on the big stage again. But if you look at the people inside the club, it's really yeah, we share the same vision. In terms of the stadium, of course, what I told you, actually one of the 2 clubs in Europe that are building a new stadium, which is also on the top of my head the most sustainable stadium in Europe. So that maybe reflects also a little bit the vision of the club to have like a long-term goal. Yeah, and just a great environment to work in, great people, and really there to help each other and not, yeah, not to compete with each other.
Jordan, I'll bring you in on this because that element of culture is something we wanted to touch on. That's so important, isn't it? And Dan was saying before about everyone having a similar vision, everyone sort of rowing the same direction. And it's so important, isn't it, in terms of a staff and a culture at a club?
Yeah, 100%. And we literally, the last episode, wasn't it, with Barry, we were talking about strategy. So if you haven't listened to Barry Trust episodes already, then yeah, go back and listen to that one, the one before. But we were talking about how important strategy, vision, and it comes from the top and all the way down is for the growth of the club. Certainly as an academy, And I think, Dan, your role, amazing. Like, you know, to be able to filter between first team and academy is great, because certainly I think we all know a lot of roles where they can be a little bit siloed, and first team, they're over that side of the building, or there might be a completely different, you know, location as well than the academy, which is over this side, or completely different location. So how do you find that vision, like you say, that strategy filters down first team through academy? Have you seen that kind of really clear structure?
Yeah, I think it starts already for us at the top level of the club, because of course we are building a new stadium. And what you mentioned, like there are a lot of clubs where it's kind of siloed. You have the first team training ground, you have the first team stadium, and it starts already for us with the board of directors saying, okay, we want to cluster all the teams in one area, so that they can feel the atmosphere also of the first team. And if it doesn't matter if you're an under 12 player or an under 14 player, that you really could feel the culture of the club. And I think that's already, like, from top down, one of the best examples of that coherent culture. But I think it's present in the whole academy. I think it's present in the way of working together with the coaches, the discussions we have on a weekly basis on different teams, to brainstorm about the program. And I think that for us is really the way of working, that we want to do it together. It doesn't matter if you train the under 12 or the under 21. We want to build a program together so that the players of the under 12 eventually end up in the big stadium. And for me, that's really what drives the culture within the club.
And in terms of your development at the club and the roles that you've been in, working with the academy, I know that's split now where you're more first team predominantly. I know this might be a question for this season coming a little bit more than now, but what benefits have you seen working from the academy going into first team at the same club?
Well, actually, we started to see the benefits already. To provide a little bit of context, a few years ago, the people that are the academy players that play in the first team was only one player. And I think it was 4 years ago, and it was more kind of more luck that he made it than that we really have a structured plan with him. And if you see the academy players now playing in the first team, I think from the top of my head we have 12 players that made their debut last season. Of course, it's not only the physical department that was responsible for this, but I think the coherent vision from the academy eventually led to a lot of guys making their debut. And of course, it's also the situation a little bit from the club. If you play in a lower level, of course, you rely a little bit more on the academy players. But I feel that, just the vision and the culture within the club drove that so many players can play at that level already. And we try to build that every year. So I think you basically see already some benefits of the long-term plan. But we are planning to grow it, of course, more and have like a structured approach to it.
Is there anything on that in terms of, we talked about vision and the importance of setting vision, and like Jordan said, it was something that Barry talked about a lot in the last episode. But with that in mind, because that's a big growth, isn't it? From one player getting through to suddenly you've got 12 within the season. It's a big growth in terms of the amount of players. Is that something precisely that is being set from above, or is it a case of we just want more players to come through?
For me, it was a bit of both, because in a small club like this, everybody is growing. Like, everybody wants to contribute, and you're kind of finding your way in working together and setting goals for the future. Because if you look 6 years ago, it was already nice to have an academy team for the community, but we didn't really have the plan to bring those players to the next level. We basically relied a little bit more on buying, improving, and selling those players. But of course, now we set some new targets. So we have like 5-year plans and long-term plans, and we want like a structured approach in how many academy players are present in the first team. And of course, for me, what does it mean in terms of physical development for those players? So in the beginning, it was a little bit of luck maybe a good vision, and now we want to have a structured approach. Like at least from the top of my head, 40% of the players that play in the first team need to be academy players to really get that flow in the team.
You've made a really good point there as well, because I know you said that that is the vision of the club that you're at right now. You also gave the example of maybe a different club that says we're going to bring players through to the first team and our intention is then to sell them, which is real life, isn't it? That's what some clubs do. But I think that comes back to understanding that vision, doesn't it? And Jordan, with that in mind, with those two differences or two sort of differences in targets or visions, would that impact, it'd be interesting to hear what you both think on this, would that impact how you prepare players or not through an academy?
Yeah, I'd say so. And just from my experience in this country of working at smaller clubs, that, like Dan said, the pathway is sometimes better for players because obviously there's less structure and less competition of places just through less numbers in the building that, you know, eyes on. So but I think if you're preparing players just for general first team demands of football, you know, you might just go off, for example, most go off what the league averages are, right? You might be going, right, we know we need to hit this target, we know we need to be ready, we know we need to hit, say, you know, this amount of high speed running per game for this position, because that's basically what players in this league are doing. But then if your team vision is that we play a certain way, and your certain strategy might be, we really believe on, you know, playing out from the back or playing through the thirds, or actually we try and play really direct, fast football, then your metrics might change. So you might actually then go, actually, we rely on somebody who has a higher, say, repeated sprint ability than someone who can just trudge around the pitch all day. And that might, and it might be real minute differences. But you'll probably start to kind of pick out players from early doors of who really suits the system and who doesn't. I mean, anyone who's worked in the academy for long enough will know players that you kind of go, oh, he's a bit of an old-fashioned player, or he's this way. And depending on your club's culture, you might go, he's a really good player and he's effective and he scores, but he doesn't really fit our system, but he's in your academy. So then it's like you kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place, and you go, well, actually, he might be one that we end up looking at selling on later on down the line, or you change the system. So it's a harder one, and it depends. It comes back to, like we've said, it's the strategy of the club. If the strategy is very solid, and we say this is the way we play, this is the way we believe in it, we believe in you know, our style, we believe in the manager, etc., then you shouldn't bend the rules sort of thing for one player if he doesn't fit in the system. So it's a tough one, but I definitely think there's a difference. Yeah, if you're looking at selling players and you're looking at players in your first team, how you prepare them will probably be different.
Dan, what's your views on that?
I totally agree. I think for us it's the same, and it's always a hard balance between winning matches, promoting to the first division, which obviously benefits every player in the team, but also keeping like a sort of a revenue stream of players. And therefore, we have a lot of internal discussions. Okay, starting with, especially for example in a preseason, what is the long-term plan for this player? Is it a player in which we want to use now, which we want to develop in the system, and we're planning to use him for the coming 5 years? Or is it like a young player that, as Jordan already mentioned, maybe not really suitable for our playing style, but which we can develop maybe for another club? And I think that balance is really interesting, because of course the head coach, he wants to win, and that's also his job. And from, for example, the board of directors or the technical directors, they also care a little bit more about the revenue stream. And that's just some part of the daily discussions we have. And really developing that plan for a player, and that everybody in the coaching staff also knows what the plan for this player is. And I think a major part of that is also incorporating the vision of the player itself. So what is his plan? For example, we had a player here, Alex Bangura, went last year to the championship, plays now for Middlesbrough. And when I came first at the club, he already mentioned to me, Dan, I want to play in the Premier League. Okay, I said to him, that's a great goal. Of course, I was a little bit hesitant, but it's great to see like the motivation of the players. And then we just set some small goals, and a long-term plan to build up to that level. So, for example, what Jordan mentioned, if you use the benchmarks, we try to use of course, the benchmark of our club. So, what is like the minimal value you need to have in order to play for the first team? But we tried also to look beyond that. So, what is the benchmark, for example, in your playing style, on your playing position in the championship? To really look further than Cambuur from the club point of view, because they also benefit, of course, from selling the player, but also from the player's perspective, like what drives him, what is his why. And I think that's also really important in developing these plans to really incorporate the player in it.
It's a great example of it happening in real life, isn't it, in a real scenario. So no, I appreciate you sharing that. Let's move on to pre-season, because we're not too many weeks away now from clubs going back. In fact, I think I heard a club going back potentially next week already.
Yes.
Yeah. So clubs are getting very close now. It feels very weird with the Euros being on that clubs are actually going to be starting pre-season. But let's kick things off again. I want both of your views on this. Planning pre-season. We've spoke a lot about vision. But at the same time, there's so much stuff out there around pre-season, what we should and shouldn't do. Should we work with the ball? Should we not work with the ball? Like, is it all done on the pitch? Are we doing stuff at the training ground? Are we going away? I know budgets come into it as well. Dan, I'm going to start with you. Where do you even start in terms of planning the pre-season process? You've mentioned about the cohesive staff that you've got at the club. I imagine that's going to start with some sort of conversation with them. But talk to us about that initial planning phase of pre-season, then we'll go into some details on it as well.
Yeah. So basically, it's a team effort for us. So the benefit of having such a small staff is that you can, of course, meet regularly, really discuss some things, have the clear vision, and I think that's also the starting point of our conversation. So what is the goal for this season? We started actually already in the end of last season to first analyze, okay, what way do we want to play? What physical capabilities are needed for that style of play? And well, more a little bit in depth is what players do we need? So that's like the starting point for us to really have a clear vision and to really have that end goal in mind. And from there, we try to analyze the context first. So we made up like a system. It's like a 3-pillar system in which we analyze, individualize, and drive. And of course, it rhymes, so it must be true. That's cool. But we try to analyze the context. We try to, within the preseason, use that to individualize the program and use, for example, the testing or the analysis to really drive the performance culture. And that is more from a physical standpoint. So what do we want to achieve? What is the current situation? And where do we want to end up in 8 weeks? That's basically our starting point for the preseason.
Jordan, have you got anything on that in terms of that initial sort of planning phase?
No, I think Dan's hit the nail on the head. Like, you start at the back end of the season before and you review with an idea for what's going forward and what needs changing. I think if you start too late, you kind of chasing your tail a little bit when it comes around to it. But my view on pre-season's changed a bit over the years. I'll say it's softened. I think when I was earlier in my career, I was like, physical work, we're going to batter you, we're going to follow the research, we need to get all this high speed running, you need to do loads of Nordics, prep all the hammies, get everything ready. I think now working with players much more in a one-to-one scenario, but also working with academy players a lot more. You just need to treat them as footballers, don't you, sometimes? And remember that pre-seasons can be quite long. So if you're spending a good few weeks, there's loads of time. There's loads of time to get them ready, in my opinion. And you don't have to spend entire weeks not touching a football. Some people, the school of hard knocks might say, nah, it's about the grit, it's the determination, it's about the lake runs, running around lakes, hill runs, running up hills, and all this sort of stuff. Don't need your boots today, lads. Get your trainers on, that sort of stuff. There's a lot of that going around, and there is a lot of sense in some of that. Sometimes I don't think there is too much sense, but a lot of stuff can be done with the ball. But it just being, I think Dan says, small teams really help with this because you can hide some of the hard work in so much of your ball work, because we know small-sided games. The research around small-sided games now is pretty extensive. That it's a very good conditioning tool, and just how smart you are about manipulating the rules, the size, the numbers. You can get some brilliant conditioning demands out of there. But like, I'd nick this example purely from academies, because when you're working with younger players, say under 14s, under 15s, and you're really trying to start to expose them to sort of high-speed running demands and, like the higher intensity running, just getting them on a line and running, you're going to turn them off from that sort of work from quite an early age. So hiding it within a session and in a drill, like my favorite one's the wave drills, 2v2s, then it goes to 3v2, then a 3v3. And if one player has a shot, they have to go and do a run to a corner flag and back round and so you're hiding the high speed running and the conditioning demands within those sessions. And I think, like Dan said, the small teams, when you sit down as a multidisciplinary department, you can go, right, we actually want, from the first 3 weeks of pre-season, we want these sorts of numbers, high speed running. We're not, we just know they need to be high or this sort of stuff. And we're going to try and do it with the ball, and we're going to try and hide it in there. There might be times where we need to do top-ups at the end, but you can really start to blend the sessions and then the weeks and then the month in terms of to suit your playing style. Because if you're trying to play a really aggressive sort of counter-pressing style of football, small-sided games where turnovers constantly and you're trying to win it back really quickly suits that really well. So if you spend the first 2 weeks, just get your trainers on, lads, we're not going to touch a football, and I'm just going to get you to run and run and run and run and run. And then by the third and fourth week, we might actually touch a football. Potentially you've lost out of 2 weeks of actually some genuine good coaching input on how your playing style looks. So I think you can be really proactive with the planning, and it doesn't, like, innovative with strategy, like Dan's saying, can really help you pre-season by saying, actually, let's have a look at this now. Maybe we can get some hidden running within our sessions, and you can go from there. That's my view. Again, some people are going, no, Jordan, get the trainers on, get them running laps. But I've softened a little bit. I like to get the ball on where I can.
Dan, just culturally, it'll be interesting to hear, in Netherlands, is that similar in terms of those differences in opinion, or is ball work just a bit more of a norm for them to do pre-season?
When I started, it was more of the old school approach, more of traditional running. We need to bang in the kilometers. We need to sprint, and of course, what you say, Jordan, I couldn't agree more. It's part of it. But when I see now, it's a sort of a shift in the Netherlands in more of a contemporary approach. So more of like Spanish influences. Everything needs to be with ball. We play around with the complexity. And I think that reflects Cambuur also really good. And that's, again, the benefit of working in a small team. I experienced coaches at the under 16 who now are with me at the first team. So we know from each other already what you expect. Of course, the principles, they change a little bit, but in terms of the connection between the coach and the physical coach at our club is really, really great. And therefore, for me, it's easier to design the drills or to know what the coach wants, and to kind of adjust that a little bit so we meet the demands that we want. And we basically use the same structure as Jordan mentioned. We play around with the complexity, of course. So we try to do less complex exercise in the beginning of the season, in the first microcycle, but then we gradually build it up to the preseason. And we do some top-ups, of course, mostly individual, because also with a small club, we have a lot of shifts in players. So we first need to analyze the player, of course, because what you mentioned, Jordan, you have to treat them as footballers and sometimes also treat them as a person. So we need to know what is his drive, what is he used to at his old club. But gradually you see that the top-ups, they become less, and the football is becoming, the playing is becoming more. But in terms of hiding the high-speed running, I definitely agree. That's something what we try to do all the time, and maybe also not only hiding it, but also gamification. So making it a little interested for the players, I think that's one of the big parts for me to drive the culture in the club, to make something that might be less appealing. Of course, we played football. It's less appealing to run in a straight line, but it's more appealing if you have to do it against one another and you have to shoot on goal. And to really build situations which are specific, but also fun for the players. Yeah, it's something we really try to focus on, especially in preseason, to get the flow in the preseason.
It's a great point now. It's something that Ben Rosenblatt spoke about in his episode about what they were doing at the FA in terms of that gamification as well. He also spoke about it on the webinar he did for us. So no, it's a really good point. It's also a time of year that as practitioners, we can properly geek out on any sort of content that comes out from clubs. We all look out for other clubs in terms of the testing that they're doing, the way they're going about pre-season. I know there's plenty of discussions pop up. Pre-season testing. So what's the sort of mindset around pre-season testing? How do you decide which structure to take, which tests to use, and what to do with that data as well? Dan, start with you, and then I'll get Jordan's input on it as well.
Yeah. From my opinion, a big part is just what I said earlier, knowing the team and knowing the players. We occasionally had some teams that were quite like fond of testing. They enjoyed it. They really like to battle with each other. And we had teams with maybe a little bit older players and not used to the testing setting anymore, which didn't really look forward to it. From what I learned over the years of my career is to make the testing count, of course. So what I did in my early years was to test everything, just to test every physical capability that I have. We had some new data systems, we had some timing gates, and I was just testing the guys like every week. And but in gathering the data and really doing anything with it, it wasn't something we could do because we were a small club and we didn't have the resources to really do something with it. So that's something that stuck with me over the years, to really make the testing count in terms from the player perspective. So of course they don't want like testing every day, but also in terms from what you are planning to do with the test. And the second part, of course, for me is the biggest part. I just want the results that I'm really going to use within the training program, especially, as I mentioned, to individualize the program. So of course I want to assess the whole physical status of the team, but then I want to use that status, maybe some components, maybe some characteristics of players, to really stimulate the individual instead of just planning a group program and expecting that everybody will perform. So for me, that's basically the two major parts in deciding what to test, but also when to test.
Yeah, no, I think, again, that real life example, we've talked a lot about the positives of the small team and sort of cohesively that people can work together and pull in the same way. But I suppose one thing that you've mentioned there is, with a larger team, there's more bodies to be dealing with, more data and more testing and things like that as well, isn't there? So, and I know that just then leads you into a decision of exactly what you just talked about there. I've got all of this data and all these tests that I could potentially do, but what is going to give me what I can use with the players and have a real impact? So it's a really interesting one, isn't it, Jordan, in terms of the approaches that different coaches take, different clubs take, in terms of the staffing structure as well and how that feeds into it.
Yeah, 100%. That Dan's spot on with that. I think we're definitely seeing a consistent theme now, aren't we, as well, with people who are on the podcast that are saying if we don't use the data, we don't use the data, sort of thing, and we'll strip it out. We'll strip that test out. And I think Mike, just to echo what Dan's saying, really be consistent with it, because if you're testing everything under the sun on the first day of pre-season, and then you never look at, say, I don't know, like a groin squeeze score again, then why are you doing groin squeezes? I would advise potentially do look at groin squeeze scores again, but some people don't, because they, like you say, they might not have that capability. They might not have the manpower. They might go, right, first 3 days I'm going to test everything under the sun because this is what I've read and this is really, really good and blah, 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 blah. And then all you've actually physically got the time for is to potentially look at like some sort of Nordic score, potentially their fitness score, MAS scores, and then you're kind of having to go off that, because when you're working with a full squad, you're going, right, actually, I can only individualize to this level now, and all that data that I've just collected and spent 2.5 days collecting, I can't really affect and do anything about it. So just be consistent. If you value tests, use those tests consistently, and it comes down to what you as a medical and a sports science department value. And if you're going, actually, we see real value in the groin squeeze scores, you definitely want to test that, and we're going to retest it again in 4 weeks, and then we're going to retest it in 8 weeks. And I think the main one for me, I will always go back to, is some sort of fitness score. You're going to need something to see what condition the players are in, and there's multiple ways of doing that. It can just be 1K tests, 1.6K tests, MAS, just to get a MAS score, or just time. Simply, if you're thinking, I'm not quite clued up on MAS scores and calculators and stuff, just get your players running like a 1,500-meter time trial, record the time, and then retest them in 4 weeks, and then potentially just before you go back into the season, and see if they've improved the score. That might sound incredibly rudimentary, and they would have been doing that 40, 50 years ago, I'm pretty sure, but it gives you an idea of fitness levels and who's improved. And that's something to go on if you are really low on manpower, if potentially working in a non-league setting where you haven't got any resources and it's just you who's trying to do everything. That's the sort of thing which can be effective. But yeah, I think that's, like I said, the real world example of big club, and small team, big team, pros and cons of both. Now, I really like working in small teams, because like Dan said, the cohesive nature of it, and you can really get into some real good details. But the flip side is, actually, we're going to have to be quite lean in our program and what we do. So yeah, I think Dan's absolutely spot on.
Dan, just to flick it back to what you mentioned before, when you gave the specific example of the player that had that ambition of moving on and moving to the Championship and Premier League eventually, hopefully, as well. When you've done your testing and you've got the data, you're then going to create player profiles off the back of that. And I suppose this is where it gets real from what you've talked about already, because those profiles are going to give you the way of individualizing the program from the testing, aren't they? When you've taken what you want from that. Well, then does that ambition of the player or the targets of the player come into that profile as well, like you just mentioned before?
Definitely. I think the strength of the profiles is, of course, the holistic approach. So not only like the physical aspect of the player, but also his dreams, his why, the long-term plan, maybe his situation at home, mental status. For me, that really drives the value of the profile. To me, the numbers physically, of course, you need to have them, and I totally agree with you, Jordan. We do the mass testing, we do anaerobic speed reserve testing. We build, of course, the player profiles based on locomotor profiles. However, to supplement it really with the personal features of that player, I think it really drives up the value of the profile itself. Of course, on a daily basis, I'm more focused on the physical part. So really analyzing the physical aspects, maybe microloading the player in terms of their locomotor profiles. But in the back of my mind, I always know how can I use his whole profile, mental stage, or what makes him tick to really motivate the player. And I think in terms of testing also, what I said earlier, to really drive the performance culture, I think it's really good to reflect back on the testing regularly with the player, of course, and to make them accountable and give them a sense of autonomy within it to really drive up the intrinsic motivation. And it's actually something I have from a Dutch colleague. I don't know if you heard of him, Bart Heuving. It's a specialist from AZ, big club in the Netherlands. But he really he wrote a book on growth mindset, and this is one of the aspects, making players aware of their process. So not focusing only on the result, but also on the process, and making them more autonomous on it. And I think that drives what I said, the value of such a profile.
I think that shows the value of, like you keep saying, that the why, but then also the human nature and the human interaction element, where you aren't just treating the players as another number. another person that fills the shirt, and you're actually, like you say, starting to involve them in the education side of it. Right, this is why we're doing this test. This is why we're doing that. And I think like that we'll never escape from that. We did an episode, I think it was with Barry, wasn't it, where we spoke about there's more data than ever, there's more sports science involvement, but that human face-to-face interaction, having just a heart-to-heart sometimes, is arguably one of the most important factors when working with players, isn't it? And even in a team setting, it's harder to do in a team setting because you've got so many players. I get that. But what would be your advice, Dan, in terms of how do you develop that skill if you're a newer practitioner? How do you try and interact with players better? How do you try and get to their why better?
For me, it's really building the relationship. And what I noticed also in the past years, when you begin, you have the feeling that you can connect with everybody. And I noticed also that is not always the case. So some players, they just maybe personally don't level with you, or have a better relationship with another coach. But I think that's again the value of a smaller team, that every player clicks with a coach. So in terms of building relationships, there's always like a coach or maybe a person within the club that the player can maybe filter his thoughts to and really build that connection on. For me, building connections with the players is really about just interest. I see a lot of practitioners, but also interns that come into through our club, and they're really focused, of course, on the content, on the testing scores, on making sure that the players they run. So they scream at the players, but really interested about the personal life, asking about that and really listening to that. I think that really drives up the relationship with that player, and that needs to be, of course, authentic. So a player also, for my opinion, feels that if you force like being interested in him, it needs to be something that's really within you. And we talked a lot already on the why, but if I reflect back to myself, that's also my why. So of course, the physical component is something that really interests me, and I love to learn it like every night. But my why is also to help people and to give them sort of a pathway into success. And I think that also is really important, that you have your own why and that you're really interested in the player itself from an authentic standpoint.
Dan, how much do you think your playing background helped you with that as a coach? Because you've obviously worked with coaches before, and I'm sure you've had good experience and probably not so good experiences as well of coaches maybe getting that why out of you or using it as a motivational tool to drive you on. Well, how much do you think you experiencing the other side has helped?
In terms of finding my own why, it really helped. But I've experienced some things in my career, of course, that were great. I've experienced some things that were a little bit less great. But that's you can use all that information and your own practical examples to, especially in academies, to really motivate them. So from that standpoint, it's really great to have that background. Of course, it's not necessary, but you can a little bit level a little bit more with players. You can maybe feel a little bit what they are feeling. So from that standpoint, I think it's really great. Arriving at the first team, they didn't think I played in a high enough level. So then you needed to play at the first level again. But even there, to really level with the players, to understand what they are feeling, is something that I think is really useful in terms of building the relationship. In terms of practical sense, I played, I believe now 10 years ago. So that's already a lot different from what we are doing now. So for me, the value is a little bit more in like the experience, conversations you can have with the players, to really build a relationship.
Brilliant. In terms of just relating back to the testing, which you talked before about using it as the motivational tool as you go through the season as well, to sort of show the development that the players are experiencing throughout the season. What's your structure for like retest? So you do your preseason testing. What does the season roughly look like in terms of testing?
It depends a little bit on the test. For example, we have some tests that are kind of related more to the physical capabilities of the player, and some tests are related a little bit more to the bodily structure. So, for example, we do groin squeeze chest testing, we do hamstring testing, and that's something we do basically every microcycle. So one, to test the progress in it, of course, and one to also to manage the fatigue of the players. So that's something that comes back regularly within the season. And then I really like to disperse the other testing. So, for example, I would do a mass test in the beginning of the season to reflect back on the off season. Of course, I will do it again at the end of the season to reflect back on the preseason. And then I do basically I have the rule like one test a week. So I do one test, for example, a mass test in the first week. Then I do the second week, I do more of more jump related tested horizontally. And so I try to periodize, like every week I do one testing moment. And I try to relate it a little bit, what we mentioned already, to the gamification. So for example, if we have a 30-meter sprint test, I would do it in the session. I would do it with two timing gates next to each other and make it a race so that they're not aware of that they're testing. But I basically want to retest the whole structure within 6 weeks. So within the 6 weeks, I try to incorporate a test a week.
Awesome. Jordan, have you got any final thoughts, views, questions, or anything for Dan on pre-season?
I think it's a very, very well thought out, structured plan. Just in my view, I think, hiding stuff's always useful. We all know players that go, oh, testing, and hiding things in there is a great shout. I actually quite like I'd have done it myself. Just I think through academy settings, maybe more English clubs, we do it this way, where it's like you kind of test all together, don't you? Try to get it out of the way, sort of thing. So I quite like the idea of one test a week throughout. I think that's really, really good. Certainly working one-on-one with players now. Yeah, I quite like to do that, where we'll go like, I'm seeing you later in the week, we'll do that test then. Seeing you next week, we'll do that test then. So I think that can work really well. So yeah, I definitely think there's lots to take away for if you're a practitioner already planning and just kind of finalizing your details on your pre-season plan. Hopefully we're not throwing too many spanners in the works and then all of a sudden ripping up and go, no, let's start again. I'm going to start. No, I need to do this. So no, really good, really good.
No, Dan, I fully agree, mate. I'd just like to say just massive thank you for coming on, because I know we didn't give you much notice on this episode, and the detail that you've given, obviously from it being quite current at the moment, I know, and you're about to get into that period now, but I think there's been so much people can take from the episode, and you've also given some really good real life situations of things that have happened with players as well. So I just want to say a massive thank you for coming on.
No problem, man. I'm glad to be on the show, and thanks for the opportunity. And it was a really nice chat.
Dan, just wrap us up. Is there anywhere in particular, if people have got questions or they want to reach out to you, would you direct them anywhere in particular?
I'm active on Instagram. It's basically my first and last name. And I'm also active on LinkedIn. If they have any questions, I think LinkedIn is the most suitable platform, of course. But that's some of the two platforms I'm really active on.
Amazing. No, I encourage that, because Dan's obviously someone in our community as well that's always really active in the discussion. So I really appreciate you doing it. I've got one more question for you both. Who's going to win the Euros? Dan, we've got two more games to go in the first round. I want an answer from both of you.
Yeah, of course I have to say the Netherlands, but I think Germany. But I might stick with the Netherlands to not upset anyone.
So we're going head and heart, yeah? In head and heart. Okay. Jordan, what about you?
I was going to say Germany as well. I fancy them. I think we're English, so we you either believe we're going to win everything, or you're the opposite way and go, no, we're not even going to get out of the groups. But hey, Slovakia could be a good start. There you go. No, but Germany for me. I think they're going to win it.
Okay, well, I'm going to be the naive Englishman and go England. We'll use this clip. We'll use it.
Yeah, that's it. It's a quote. Cartwright, 2024, England are winning the Euros. There you go.
Exactly.
You said it first.
Lads, thank you very much. I think there was loads in that one, so I really appreciate you doing it. And yeah, best of luck going into the new season, Dan, as well.
Thank you so much.
Jordan, I thought that one had so much packed in to quite a short amount of time. And Dan was obviously someone that we reached out to on the community to get on the podcast. But I felt like there was so many applied examples that he gave in that episode, as well as sort of giving his mindset around the planning side as well. What did you take of that?
Yeah, 100%. I think if you are a young practitioner and you've just taken over like a lead role and you are planning your first pre-season or even second, third, fourth pre-season, that's a brilliant episode, isn't it? I was thinking as you were saying it, I was like, I wish I had this a few years ago when I was in that situation, like, yeah, going back 6-7 years. I wish I had this in my disposal sort of thing. But no, in terms of, yeah, just breaking down, certainly when you're working in smaller teams, because that's probably where a few people might be right now, in then maybe their first role, or they're 2 years in a small team and they're really trying to knuckle down and don't fall into the trap, basically, like Dan says, of just doing, I've got all this data and then not using it sort of thing. So yeah, really, really good, like comprehensive breakdown of loads of things actually. And also, like you were saying, like find the players why and all that sort of stuff. I think there's, like you said, there's so many things bigger than just pre-season, just general day-to-day throughout the season and off-season as well.
I thought, like you mentioned, the timing of the episode from Barry into the episode with Dan was really nice, because everything he spoke around vision was obviously echoed in this episode. And I know Barry's not currently at a club in a full-time role, so it was nice to see someone that is talking about a similar sort of thing as well. The other thing I know that you mentioned was the differences between, and we brought up, preparing for a first team to potentially sell the player and preparing for a first team to play in that first team. So I thought that was an interesting one as well. Not necessarily something I thought about too much before the episode, but that's real life as well, isn't it? You've got a lot of clubs in both camps. And again, just to flick it back to what we talked about, as long as we know what we're preparing for, then we've got a clearer vision on what we're actually doing then, haven't we, in terms of the program?
Yeah, it comes back to the strategy and vision again, doesn't it? It really, really does. And I think it just shows how important it is. And like you say, timing off Barry's one, this is a brilliant and real world example. But I think just to expand on what I was saying earlier, I think a lot of 23s and 21 setups, this is where you see it a lot. Players, you go, well, they're clearly talented to still be playing in an academy setting at that age group, but they might not quite fit the model. And then this is where, in my opinion, this is speaking completely off any sort of biases here now, it's like I think clubs need to be a little bit better at sorting that pathway for players to be moved on. And it's not a bad thing if they don't break into the first team. It just might be that the timing isn't right, or if you've got loads of left backs in the first team who are really strong, and then you've got a young left back as well, there might not be a pathway for him. But can you facilitate that pathway for somebody else? For a different club that is, and I like what I'm saying in terms of preparing players not just for ourselves but for other clubs. And I just get a sense that sometimes whenever you speak to a Dutch practitioner, or sometimes just European practitioners, there is a bit more of a I don't know what you'd call it, like synergy between some of the clubs, that they're almost happy to do that. And I think English football could really benefit from that. I really do. And that some clubs are happy to, actually, we've got a young player, they're really good. He or she doesn't quite fit the model, but we think they could potentially, maybe have a look at them. I think that would really benefit English football, and then eventually, hopefully, the national game as well.
100%. No, let us know what you thought on this one, because we thoroughly enjoyed it, and I know it's a period of the season now going into pre-season as well, so it'd be great to hear people's thoughts, like we mentioned on the last one. Comment on the YouTube, and also share on socials, but don't just share with your thoughts on it as well. Takeaways or views, or maybe your experiences of pre-season as well. We'll jump on it and react to some of those as well. Jordan, thank you again for coming on, mate. It's always nice to have you on the podcast and hear your perspectives on the different topics as well. I'll just say as well, just make sure that everyone goes and gives our sponsors a follow. At least a follow anyway. That is Hytro, Rezzil, and the Good Prep. And yeah, Thank you very much. We'll speak to you again in episode 296.
See you soon.